On a warm, golden evening in Los Angeles, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant shades of orange and pink, as if the city were bidding farewell to the day with a breathtaking show. The city, known for its iconic landmarks and glitzy lifestyle, was about to witness an unexpected and somewhat uncomfortable moment involving one of its most beloved residents, Keanu Reeves. The actor, known for his humility and down-to-earth persona, arrived at the gates of his luxury condominium on a vintage Norton Commando 9161 motorcycle, his attire casual and simple. He wasn't dressed in the expensive suits and designer clothes that one might expect from someone of his stature. Instead, he wore something that reflected his humble nature, a laid-back, approachable style that mirrored his character both on and off screen. The story, this understated elegance, was one of the many qualities that made Keanu so beloved, not just in Hollywood, but worldwide. As Keanu pulled up to the entrance, he slowed down and parked his bike beside the security booth. He removed his helmet, revealing the familiar face millions of people recognized instantly. Keanu smiled at the security guard, offering a friendly, "Good evening." However, instead of returning the smile, the guard, who was unfamiliar with Keanu, looked at him with suspicion. And the guard didn't immediately recognize the actor, and as he studied Keanu's simple motorcycle and unassuming appearance, doubt crept into his mind. This wasn't the kind of vehicle typically seen parked outside a high-end condominium like this. No Ferraris or Lamborghinis, no gleaming black SUVs, just a vintage bike that seemed out of place in the luxury enclave. The guard's posture became more rigid as he eyed Keanu carefully. His skepticism was palpable. "Do you live here?" the guard asked, his voice polite but cautious. Keanu, ever calm and collected, responded in his usual manner. "Good evening, yes. I recently moved in. My name is Keanu Reeves." The name hung in the air for a moment, and the guard paused, clearly processing what he had just heard. Keanu Reeves. The name was undoubtedly familiar to anyone who had watched movies, but the man standing before him didn't seem to fit the image of a Hollywood star. The guard furrowed his brow, questioning the authenticity of Keanu's claim. After all, Keanu had arrived on a simple motorcycle, and his attire didn't scream celebrity. The guard seemed to wrestle with the dissonance between the actor's name and his appearance. Was this really Keanu Reeves? "Keanu Reeves," the guard repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "Can you prove it? You don't exactly look like someone who lives here." The skepticism in his tone was unmistakable. It was clear that the guard was judging Keanu based on appearance and not on any factual evidence. Keanu, ever gracious, didn't take offense. Instead, he calmly explained, "I understand, and I can show you the purchase documents and lease agreement if necessary. I have them right here." Keanu held up his bag, offering to provide the necessary documentation to verify his identity and residency. But instead of simply checking the papers, the guard's suspicion only deepened. He looked at Keanu's motorcycle again, casting a judgmental glance at the sleek, yet unpretentious vehicle. The guard crossed his arms and shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you in without confirmation in the system," he said. "And to be honest, no one mentioned that you'd be moving in." The security guard's tone shifted from polite inquiry to one of more firm defensiveness. It was almost as if he was preparing himself to justify his actions, as though he had made up his mind about the situation. Keanu, sensing the tension rising, remained calm but was clearly growing uncomfortable with the treatment. "I understand," he replied. "I'm happy to wait while you confirm with someone from the management office." The guard, however, wasn't interested in making the confirmation process easy. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" he asked, now with a hint of irony in his voice. "This condominium isn't exactly for ordinary people." The comment, though veiled in a question, was an assumption, a prejudgment about who belonged in such a high-end building. Keanu felt the sting of the remark, but rather than reacting negatively, he took a deep breath, keeping his posture calm and his emotions in check. "Don't worry, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he replied with a quiet confidence that diffused the growing tension, but the silence that followed was palpable. It was clear that the guard was unconvinced, but Keanu, undeterred, maintained his composure. He wasn't about to let a misunderstanding escalate into something more uncomfortable than it already was. The security guard hesitated but then gave a slight nod and turned his attention back to his radio. Keanu stood by his motorcycle, remaining patient, waiting for the guard to make the call to confirm his identity. The tension between them hung in the air like a thick fog. Keanu knew he wasn't just fighting for entry into his own home, he was also battling the biases and prejudices that some people still carried, regardless of how famous or well-liked a person might be. The guard's refusal to even check the system before passing judgment was a clear indication that Keanu's appearance, his choice of a modest motorcycle, his unpretentious clothing, had already painted a picture of someone who didn't fit into the guard's idealized notion of what a resident of the condominium should look like. Finally, the guard picked up his radio and called into the central office. "Main gate, we have a man here claiming to be the new resident of apartment 52. His name is Keanu Reeves. Can you check the system?" The call went out, and Keanu stood silently by his bike, hoping the situation would soon resolve. But as the guard waited for a response, it was clear that the problem was not just one of verification, it was one of perception. The guard's reluctance to accept the possibility that Keanu, in all his simplicity, could be a legitimate resident revealed a deep-seated bias. Keanu's patience was admirable, but even he couldn't ignore the underlying tension of the moment. The guard's tone became more defensive as he waited for a response. When it finally came, it was clear the situation wasn't going to be resolved quickly. The guard shook his head, a smug expression crossing his face. "Just as I thought," he muttered. "There's no record of anyone with that name." Keanu's expression didn't waver, he simply nodded. "Maybe the system hasn't been updated yet. It happens." The guard, still not convinced, seemed to dismiss Keanu's explanation with a wave of his hand. "Yeah, it happens, but I've worked here for years, and I've never seen anyone arrive unregistered, especially in a place like this. You get what I mean?" The insinuation hung in the air. Keanu didn't belong. His humble appearance didn't fit the stereotype of the kind of person who would live in a high-end building like this. At that moment, it was clear that the issue wasn't just about verification, it was about perception, judgment, and bias. Keanu could feel it, but he refused to let it affect him. He stood his ground, determined to not let the prejudices of others dictate how he was treated. He knew that sooner or later, the truth would come to light. As the minutes ticked by, Keanu Reeves stood there with a quiet resolve, his motorcycle resting by his side, the weight of the situation hanging in the air. The guard, still unsure and visibly uncomfortable with the continued tension, glanced at him occasionally, but never seemed ready to accept the situation as it was. Keanu's patience was a testament to his character, a character that had been shaped by years of dealing with the public's perception of him. A public that often saw him through the lens of his fame rather than the man he truly was. But tonight, standing in front of a gate to his new home, the reality of being judged solely by outward appearances became clear. His humble presence, a far cry from the typical glamorous image of a celebrity, had already planted a seed of doubt in the security guard's mind. The guard wasn't merely questioning the legitimacy of Keanu's claim to residence. He was questioning Keanu's very right to be there, based on nothing more than a few superficial assumptions. Keanu knew the drill. Being a public figure often meant that people saw you not for who you truly were, but for the roles you played on screen or the persona you had come to represent. In Hollywood, where appearances could be deceiving, the pressure to fit into a particular mold was intense. Most celebrities, especially those who had the kind of status Keanu did, would arrive at a high-end condominium in a sleek luxury vehicle, something that screamed wealth and status. But Keanu, as always, had chosen the path less traveled. He didn't need the flashy cars or the designer labels to prove who he was. His worth wasn't tied to material possessions, and it certainly wasn't reflected in the way he dressed or the bike he chose to ride. Keanu's choice to live in this particular condominium had been a deliberate one. He didn't want to be surrounded by the chaos and noise that often accompanied the high-profile lifestyle of a Hollywood celebrity. Instead, he sought peace, tranquility, and a sense of solitude that only a place like this could offer. He had found a sanctuary, a place where he could escape the relentless attention of the outside world. But as he stood there, trying to explain who he was, he realized that the very sanctuary he had hoped to find could still be full of judgment, prejudice, and misunderstanding. The guard's refusal to acknowledge Keanu, despite his polite and calm demeanor, was a clear reminder of the biases that still existed in society, even in spaces that were meant to be exclusive, quiet, and safe. Keanu had always been a man who embodied humility, even in the face of immense fame. His unassuming nature had been a part of his charm, both on screen and in real life. Yet tonight, he was faced with a situation that put his patience and grace to the test. He could have easily raised his voice, become frustrated, or demanded to be let in immediately, but that wasn't who Keanu was. He wasn't a man who would allow his ego to dictate his actions, no matter how ridiculous the situation might seem. Instead, he chose to remain composed, knowing that in time the truth would come out. He knew that eventually, the reality of the situation, his identity, his right to be there, and the error in the system would become apparent. As the security guard continued to stare at him with suspicion, Keanu remained silent, understanding that the guard was merely doing his job. But Keanu also understood that the job wasn't just about following rules, it was about the way people treated each other. This was not just about a mistake in the system or a failure to verify Keanu's residence, it was about the underlying prejudices that people held, often unconsciously, and how those prejudices affected the way they interacted with others. The guard didn't see Keanu as a man, he saw him as a celebrity, someone who was supposed to fit into a specific mold, someone who was supposed to show up in a luxury car, someone who was supposed to embody a certain image. But Keanu, with his simple motorcycle and humble demeanor, didn't fit that image. And for the guard, that was enough to doubt his legitimacy. Keanu's decision to wait to remain calm in the face of mounting frustration was a reflection of his character. In that moment, he wasn't just standing up for himself, he was standing up for the idea that people should be treated with respect and dignity regardless of how they looked or what they owned. The security guard's insistence on following protocol, while understandable in the context of his job, had become a tool of exclusion. The guard was not just concerned with verifying Keanu's identity, he was focused on the fact that Keanu didn't fit into the preconceived notions of what a person living in this building should look like. This subtle form of prejudice, though not overt, was still present in the guard's words and actions. Keanu, recognizing this, chose to ignore the judgment and continue waiting, fully aware that the situation would resolve itself in time. The night wore on and the temperature dropped as the sky darkened, but Keanu remained where he was, steady and unyielding. He knew that this moment was bigger than just gaining entry to his home. It was about challenging the assumptions people made based on appearances and standing firm in the face of unfair treatment. He wasn't the kind of person to back down from a challenge, but his challenge wasn't one of confrontation. It was a challenge to be seen for who he truly was, not for who people assumed he was based on external factors. As the tension continued to rise, Keanu could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He knew that every minute spent standing there, waiting for confirmation, was another minute of being judged. But he refused to let that judgment dictate how he responded. He knew that sooner or later, the truth would come to light. The security guard's refusal to acknowledge Keanu's authenticity was rooted in something deeper, something that wasn't about the system or the documents, but about the way people were conditioned to view others based on superficial factors. Keanu had always understood the importance of breaking down those barriers, of seeing beyond the surface to understand the true nature of a person. And so, as he stood there, he knew that this moment, this small act of patience, was a reflection of his belief that, in the end, kindness, respect, and understanding were the most important things. The guard's continued skepticism didn't faze Keanu. He wasn't in a hurry, and he wasn't about to let someone else's prejudice change his behavior. He had spent his entire career in the public eye, and he knew that the way people treated him was often influenced more by their own assumptions than by anything he actually did. But what made this moment so different was that it wasn't just about him. It was about challenging the broader societal norms and expectations that limited people based on their appearances, wealth, or status. As Keanu patiently waited, he was sending a powerful message that no matter how much you were judged, your true value could never be measured by those external factors. And in time, the truth would always find its way to the surface. As the tense moments continued to drag on at the gate of the luxury condominium, the situation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable for everyone involved. Keanu Reeves, standing by his motorcycle, had been patiently waiting for what felt like an eternity. The security guard, still refusing to acknowledge his legitimacy as a resident, was growing more visibly frustrated. Despite Keanu's calm demeanor and his willingness to cooperate, the guard was not letting go of his skepticism. Every word from the guard seemed to carry a thinly veiled judgment, making it clear that this was not just about verifying Keanu's identity, it was about something deeper, something rooted in assumptions and prejudice. Keanu had already made it clear that he was the new resident of apartment 52A2. He had offered to show the necessary documents multiple times, but the guard's refusal to accept them was becoming a clear indication that this wasn't just a matter of protocol. It was about the guard's perception of Keanu. Keanu's understated presence, his simple motorcycle, and his casual attire didn't fit the image the guard had of someone who belonged in such a high-end exclusive building. Keanu could feel the weight of judgment bearing down on him, but he refused to let it affect his composure. Instead, he stood silently, waiting for the truth to come to light. The guard, however, was not about to relent. His frustration was growing, and it became clear that he wasn't just questioning Keanu's residency, he was questioning his right to be there, simply because Keanu didn't match the typical profile of a luxury condo resident. With each passing minute, the guard's demeanor shifted from professional skepticism to outright antagonism. His tone became more condescending, his words sharper, as if he was trying to provoke Keanu into a reaction. But Keanu remained unmoved, his calm and collected nature showing no signs of breaking. The tension in the air was palpable, and Keanu, although patient, could feel the irritation beginning to bubble under the surface. It wasn't just the inconvenience of the situation, it was the unfairness of being judged based on something as superficial as his appearance. Keanu knew that this kind of treatment wasn't something that happened to everyone, especially not in such an affluent area. He was used to being recognized, treated with respect, and offered kindness wherever he went. But tonight, he was faced with an entirely different experience, one that tested not just his patience, but his faith in the kindness of others. At that moment, just as the situation seemed to be spiraling out of control, the guard made a decision. He grabbed his radio and spoke into it with an air of authority, his voice clipped and impatient. "Central Main Gate, we've got a man here claiming to be the new resident of apartment 52. Name's Keanu Reeves. Can you check the system?" His words echoed in the air, but the only response he received was a low hum of static. Keanu stood there, silently watching as the guard waited for a response. It was clear that the guard wasn't just trying to confirm Keanu's identity. He was trying to assert his own control over the situation. This was no longer just about verifying residency, it was about power. The guard wanted to maintain his position, to prove that he was the one in charge. Keanu, despite the mounting frustration, refused to be drawn into the power struggle. He had nothing to prove. He knew who he was, and he knew that eventually the truth would prevail. But as he stood there, waiting for the confirmation, he couldn't help but wonder how the situation had gotten so out of hand. This was supposed to be a simple check-in process, a quick confirmation that he was in fact the resident of the apartment. Instead, it had turned into an interrogation, a display of authority and bias that had no place in a place like this. The seconds felt like minutes as Keanu watched the guard, who was still holding the radio to his mouth, anxiously waiting for a response. The tension between them continued to build, each one locked in a silent battle of wills. And then, as if in response to the mounting tension, the flashing lights of a police car illuminated the darkened entrance of the complex. The siren had been silenced, but the vehicle still had a commanding presence as it pulled up to the gate. Keanu, standing beside his motorcycle, didn't flinch. He had been calm throughout the entire ordeal, and he wasn't about to lose his composure now. The guard, on the other hand, straightened up immediately, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. This was his moment, his chance to show that he had been right all along, that he had done his job, and that he had been justified in his suspicions. As the police car came to a stop, two officers stepped out, their expressions serious and professional. They surveyed the scene, their eyes darting between Keanu and the security guard, taking in the details of the situation. The guard immediately approached them, eager to explain his version of events. "My goodness, you're here," the guard exclaimed, his voice filled with relief. "This man is refusing to leave. He claims to be a resident, but his name isn't in the system, and he hasn't shown any legitimate proof." He's causing a disturbance and blocking the gate. I've asked him multiple times to leave, but he won't cooperate." The two officers exchanged a quick glance before turning their attention to Keanu. The lead officer, a man in his late 30s with a no-nonsense attitude, raised his hand to signal calm. "Let's get this resolved," he said firmly. He turned to Keanu, his gaze steady but neutral. "Sir, can you tell us what's going on here?" Keanu stepped forward, holding his helmet firmly in his hand. His voice was steady, without a hint of frustration or anger. "My name is Keanu Reeves. I'm the new resident of apartment 52. It seems there's been an issue with the system and my name hasn't been registered yet. I have the documents to prove my ownership. I've been waiting for this to be sorted out." The officers listened carefully to Keanu's explanation, but the security guard, still visibly annoyed, cut in. "He's been saying that since he got here," he interjected. "Look, I've seen this kind of thing before. People making up stories, showing fake papers to try and sneak in. You can't just take his word for it just because he's talking nicely." The lead officer turned to the guard, holding up a hand to cut him off. "We'll take this one step at a time," he said, his voice firm. He turned back to Keanu. "You have those documents with you now?" Keanu nodded and opened the bag attached to his motorcycle. He pulled out a neatly organized folder and handed it to the officers. The lead officer began to review the papers while the guard crossed his arms and rolled his eyes at each page turned, his disdain for Keanu becoming more and more apparent with each passing second. The second officer, who had been quiet up until this point, shot the guard a disapproving glance but didn't speak. After a few moments, the lead officer looked up from the documents and turned to his partner. "Everything here seems legitimate. The contract is signed and registered. I see no reason to doubt this," he said, before addressing Keanu directly. "Mr. Reeves, thank you for your patience. It looks like there really was an issue with the system. We'll help clarify this." Before Keanu could respond, the guard, now visibly frustrated, stepped forward once more. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed. "You gonna believe these papers just because they look legitimate? Look at him! Look at his bike. Do you really think someone like him lives here?" The officers exchanged looks, surprised by the guard's outburst. The lead officer's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Sir," he said sharply, "this isn't a matter of opinion. What we have here are legitimate documents. He has every right to be here." The guard, however, was not ready to back down. "He shouldn't even be here in the first place," he snapped. "I knew the moment I saw him that he didn't belong." At this point, Keanu, who had remained calm throughout the entire ordeal, decided to speak up. His voice was firm but measured. "What exactly about me makes you think I don't belong here?" he asked. "Is it my bike? My clothes? Or is it just because I don't fit into your expectations of who should live in a place like this?" The guard faltered for a moment, taken aback by Keanu's directness, but he quickly regained his defensive posture, stepping back and muttering under his breath. The lead officer, finally having had enough, spoke with authority. "That's enough," he said firmly. He turned to the security guard and dismissed him with a wave of his hand. "You've made your point, but we're done here." The guard stood there, silent and defeated, as the officers turned to Keanu with a final, apologetic glance. As Keanu was finally allowed to enter his home, the officers ensured that the situation was fully resolved and the guard's actions were addressed. Though the police intervention had helped clear up the misunderstanding, the damage had already been done. Keanu had been unfairly judged, treated with suspicion, and made to wait for far too long simply because of how he looked, dressed, and arrived. The entire ordeal was a painful reminder that prejudice still lingered in society, even in the most upscale, seemingly progressive environments. And while Keanu's patience had won the day, it was clear that this was a situation that shouldn't have happened in the first place. The intervention of the police, though necessary, had been a wake-up call, a reminder that no one should ever be judged by their appearance or the assumptions others make about them. As the police officer stood by, wrapping up the situation, Keanu Reeves felt a sense of relief wash over him, but there was still an unsettling undercurrent to the entire ordeal. The situation had escalated unnecessarily, and while the officers had intervened and confirmed his identity, the deep sense of judgment he'd felt from the security guard lingered. Keanu had always been a man of grace under pressure, but the way he was treated that evening stung, a reminder that even in places of luxury, judgment and prejudice could seep through the cracks. However, the moment that would truly change everything was still to come. Just as the tension in the air began to subside, a new figure appeared, one whose presence would redefine the course of the evening. The sound of footsteps approached, and the manager of the condominium building, who had been informed about the situation, finally arrived on the scene. The manager, an older man with a professional air about him, had been monitoring the events from afar, waiting for the right moment to intervene. He had already heard about the misunderstanding and knew that the situation had gotten out of hand, but what he didn't expect was the way he would find his employee, someone tasked with ensuring the security and safety of the building, treating a resident, let alone a well-known one like Keanu Reeves, with such disrespect. The manager's expression shifted instantly as he approached the scene. The previously calm and collected demeanor he had maintained evaporated as soon as he recognized Keanu standing by his bike, the motorcycle now a symbol of the injustice that had occurred. Keanu, who had endured the treatment in silence, was about to experience the most unexpected part of the evening. The realization that the very building he had chosen to call home had failed him in ways he could never have imagined. The manager's face softened with an apologetic look, clearly aware of the mistake that had been made. "Mr. Reeves," the manager said, his voice heavy with genuine regret. "I am so sorry for what has happened here tonight. This is completely unacceptable. There has clearly been a mistake with our system, and I am deeply embarrassed that this situation unfolded the way it did." The words were a stark contrast to the harsh treatment Keanu had just endured. The manager, now aware of the seriousness of the situation, addressed Keanu with the respect and sincerity that had been so glaringly absent before. He turned to the officers, offering his thanks for their intervention, then turned back to Keanu. "We were fully aware of your movement, Mr. Reeves. Unfortunately, there was a delay in updating the system, but that's no excuse for what you've experienced here tonight." Keanu nodded, his calm demeanor never wavering. He appreciated the apology, but it was clear that the real issue wasn't just a mistake in the system, it was the way he had been treated by the security guard. The manager, seeing the genuine disappointment in Keanu's eyes, knew that the apology wasn't enough. "I will personally make sure that this issue is addressed, and I will ensure that you never have to experience something like this again," the manager promised, his tone firm and resolute. Keanu, ever the gentleman, took a deep breath and replied, "I understand. Mistakes happen, but it's important that everyone is treated with respect no matter who they are." His words were simple but carried weight. This wasn't just about the system glitch. It was about the deeper, more pervasive issue of how people were treated based on assumptions and appearances. The manager, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, turned to the security guard, whose expression had shifted from defiance to something akin to shame. The manager's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a stern tone. "I trust you'll understand the consequences of your actions," he said, addressing the guard directly. The guard, unable to meet the manager's gaze, nodded quietly. It was clear that this would be a turning point for everyone involved. The manager's intervention had not only brought a sense of justice to the situation, but had also given Keanu the acknowledgement he deserved. What had started as a misunderstanding rooted in bias and prejudice had turned into a moment of growth. A reminder that even in the most exclusive environments, fairness and respect should always come first. As Keanu was finally allowed to enter the building, the manager's words lingered in the air. This wouldn't just be a lesson for the guard. It was a wake-up call for everyone in the building that assumptions could never outweigh the importance of kindness, respect, and the recognition of one's humanity. The events that unfolded that evening, though uncomfortable and unjust, ultimately offered a powerful lesson about prejudice, judgment, and the assumptions people make based on appearances. What had started as a simple misunderstanding at the gates of an upscale condominium had morphed into a larger conversation about how society often judges others without taking the time to truly understand them. Keanu Reeves, a man known for his humility and down-to-earth nature, had found himself subjected to an experience that no one should have to endure. Being judged not for who he truly was, but for how he looked and what others assumed about him. The incident wasn't just about the mistake in the system or the failure to update Keanu's information. It was about the assumptions the security guard had made the moment Keanu arrived. The guard had looked at Keanu's simple motorcycle, his modest attire, and immediately placed him in a box, one that didn't align with the image he had of someone who belonged in such a luxurious place. This preconceived notion, based entirely on surface-level judgments, led to the treatment Keanu received, which was dismissive, condescending, and unfair. What was truly shocking was how easily the guard dismissed Keanu's identity, assuming that someone like him couldn't possibly be a resident of such an exclusive building. But this wasn't just about Keanu. The guard's actions were reflective of a broader societal issue, the tendency to judge people based on their outward appearances, wealth, or status. In the world of high-end real estate and luxury living, people often make assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't based on superficial criteria. But this mindset is flawed, and it's dangerous. It reduces people to stereotypes, preventing genuine connection and understanding. It perpetuates a cycle of exclusion, where only those who fit into narrow, preconceived categories are given respect and the benefit of the doubt. Keanu's response to the situation was a lesson in patience, dignity, and grace. He didn't react with anger or frustration, even though the situation was clearly frustrating and unjust. Instead, he took a deep breath, maintained his calm, and patiently waited for the truth to come to light. He knew that eventually the system would verify his identity, but more importantly, he knew that by staying calm and composed, he was showing that dignity wasn't about what you owned or how you looked. It was about who you were on the inside. He wasn't just standing up for himself. He was standing up for everyone who had ever been judged unfairly based on their appearance. The manager's eventual intervention and apology were crucial, but it was the lesson learned from this experience that resonated the most. It wasn't enough to just fix the immediate issue. What was needed was a shift in how people treated one another, regardless of their appearance or presumed status. The situation highlighted the importance of treating people with respect, kindness, and understanding, regardless of how they may appear on the outside. Keanu's quiet strength in the face of bias was a reminder that judgment based on assumptions only serves to divide people, and it is only by breaking down these barriers that true respect and understanding can flourish. In the end, the situation at the gate wasn't just about one security guard's failure to do his job properly. It was a broader reflection of the prejudices and biases that still permeate society, and it was a reminder that we must always strive to see people for who they truly are, not just for what we assume them to be based on superficial impressions. As Keanu Reeves finally entered the gates of his new home, a sense of quiet resolution settled over him. The drama at the gate had taken a toll, not just on him, but on everyone involved, from the security guard to the police officers and even the manager. Yet, as Keanu rode slowly toward his apartment, he understood that the events of the evening had sparked a conversation about deeper issues, ones that extended far beyond the confines of the luxury condominium complex. The incident had shone a spotlight on the biases and judgments people face every day, especially those who don't fit into a prescribed mold of success or belonging. As the gate slowly closed behind him, Keanu couldn't help but reflect on the importance of what had just transpired. Despite the tension and discomfort, the situation had ultimately been resolved with a measure of dignity, and the lessons learned were invaluable. The security guard, for his part, had been forced to confront the prejudices that had clouded his judgment. The intervention of the manager had provided an opportunity for growth, not just for the employee who had treated Keanu unfairly, but for everyone in the building. It was a wake-up call about the dangers of judgment, the harm it can cause, and the need for a shift in how people treat one another in their everyday lives. Keanu, ever the stoic figure, had stood his ground not out of defiance but out of a desire to show that no one should be judged based on superficial impressions. His calm and composed reaction in the face of unnecessary adversity was a testament to his inner strength. By refusing to escalate the situation, he not only proved his own character but also sent a message to everyone watching. Kindness, patience, and understanding were the true measures of a person's worth, not the outward appearance of success or wealth. As Keanu parked his bike and removed his helmet, a small sigh escaped his lips, a moment of quiet reflection after the storm. The ordeal had been uncomfortable, but it had also been an opportunity for the community to confront its own biases and assumptions. Keanu had been treated unfairly simply because he didn't fit into the narrow expectations of what someone with his level of fame or status should look like. But his unwavering dignity had proven that it wasn't about appearances, it was about who a person was on the inside and how they chose to treat others. The manager's apology, though important, was just the beginning of what needed to be a broader change in the way people thought about those around them. Keanu's patience and grace had set an example for everyone involved. But the real work, Keanu knew, was in the long-term effects this encounter would have on how the staff at the condominium treated their residents and each other moving forward. The prejudice displayed earlier in the evening was a reminder of how deep societal biases can run, even in the most polished and exclusive environments. As the lights of the condominium flickered in the distance and the cool evening air settled in around him, Keanu felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had stood up for himself, but more importantly, he had shown that everyone deserved to be treated with respect, regardless of their wealth, status, or the image they projected. In a world that often focused on external appearances, Keanu had once again proven that what mattered most was what lay within: the quiet strength to rise above prejudice and the willingness to always do what was right.